Community Services Committee of Rutland Town Council on Wednesday, 15th March 2023. This meeting is being recorded as usual, with no members of the public outside. I need to read an extended warning. As chair for this year, this is our last such meeting of the municipal year, and it is a clock cycle. So don't forget at the end, can I say now, thank you to every member of the committee for your attendance and support and contribution, often comments along the way, all very much appreciated. We had some good discussions and achieved a great deal, and achieved a great more this evening. Okay, apologies.
Yes, Chair, we have one apology. It's from Councillor Friggin, and I'd invite the committee to consider making a resolution.
Was a reason given, please?
I believe the reason is an urgent work deadline to meet tonight.
Okay, are we able to accept that, please? Okay. Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest? Jones report and urgent items. I don't have a report on any urgent items.
There aren't, Chair.
Any public questions?
None, Chair.
Any minutes? Yes.
Yes.
Just to read these. Any reason why we can't confirm these as a true record? Shall we approve them? In favour? Thank you. What have we done? Really need initials on each page.
Yeah, we did, yeah. Provide the reference.
Long time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. That takes us to office reports, of which we have quite a few. So, beginning on page 5, before plan and resolution tracker. So would you like to use this?
Thank you, Chair. The only thing that I would like to mention is that you will see that there are 2 items on the resolution tracker that are before the committee tonight. That's the events protocol and the True Works tender. And committee are being asked to note and approve, subject to any comments or amendments, the planner, and to note the resolution tracker and approve the removal of those resolutions marked complete.
Any comments, anyone? Okay, will we vote on the recommendation? The 2 aspects both together. The next item is the budgetary control. Mr. Dunn, would you like to introduce this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This shows the budget position as at the 31st of January. The main change since you last saw it at the last Community Services Committee is in paragraph 3.12. This relates to the tree planting budgets. For tree planting, we've used £5,000 earmarked from last year and some of the capital budget. So this means we haven't used the £5,000 that was allocated within the general budget for this year, which gives a £5,000 general saving. All the other information in there is what it was like in January. Committee is asked to note both the report and the release of the reserves as shown at paragraph 3.2, please.
I understand this has already been approved by CPF.
That's my understanding too.
Any points, questions? Okay, we will vote on noting the report and then there is at least the reserve. All those in favour? Unanimous, thank you. The defence protocol 16 hours, really, that's already.
Thank you, Chair. In November, this committee approved this event protocol on the understanding that officers would bring the protocol back to committee once we had explored some of the comments that were made during the November committee. Officers have considered the discussions at that meeting in November and have updated the protocol as per the track changes shown in Appendix A. We can also add into the protocol, further to what's shown in there at the minute, that the event organisers must provide a complaints phone number for members of the public to contact them on during the event, and that number would be publicised before the event.
I think I understand that came from a suggestion of public. That's a very helpful suggestion.
That's correct, Chair. That's all I've got to say on it for now. The committee is asked to consider it and to approve the proposed track changes at Appendix A.
Basically, tightening up on complaints and noise, isn't it?
It is, Chair.
Yep. Okay. Town Clerk, there was one other suggestion, which I think came from the same member of the public, and I'm not updating my emails. Is that one that needs to reflect and change here or not? We don't discuss it if it doesn't.
Chair, is that the one in relation to the time?
Yes, that's
the
right.
end time. Yeah. So, the question on that was that should there be essentially a limit on the lateness that events can go on up to 10:30 at night. So, our advice is that we wouldn't put a specific time in. Because for some events that just wouldn't be appropriate. For example, the open air cinema has historically gone on beyond that date. So the plan is when an event organiser submits an application to us and puts forward their preferred timings, we would then have a look at that in the context of the event protocol noise and then make recommendations to the committee. So having a blanket approach to a certain time probably is a bit too inflexible for us, because there are some events that probably wouldn't cause too much of an issue that might go on beyond that time. So we advise that we wouldn't make it rigid in the event protocol, but of course that is a consideration that we would be making when we make recommendations.
So the town would go in on a case by case basis.
Absolutely,
Which
yeah.
didn't
Which
tell you.
suits that council, yeah.
Okay. Any, Councillor Scriven.
Thank you, Chair. Just a query really. So when it talks about them obviously monitoring their noise levels, and obviously there's a maximum decibel level set. If complaints are received and they've reported that they're below the maximum decibel level, is the complaint just disregarded, or do we still take that complaint seriously, and can a fine still be upheld?
I give that to one or other.
Yeah, so in my view, if somebody makes a complaint, then we will deal with that complaint under our own complaints process. If it's noise related, the protocol means that there are immediate steps that need to be taken to investigate that. So if an event has got an agreed decibel level and it isn't in excess of that, then in the terms of the agreed arrangement with the event organiser, they haven't broke that. So we would then still carry out a complaint response afterwards. And off the back of that, there may be some learning for us as a council that suggests that maybe that level wasn't appropriate. So the complaint would still be followed through at the time under the noise element, and the town council would also follow it through as a complaint on the event. But
They wouldn't have to deal with it, as it were, and they wouldn't receive a fine.
no, so not if they're underneath an agreed level. I wouldn't suggest so. Although, perhaps there may be something, without a specific example, there may be something that they've done alongside that might have caused an additional issue. But I think if we're setting out, Chair, a clear framework and a clear acceptance or tolerance level, and they're within that, then that's kind of reasonable.
Okay.
Thank you. Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to make an incredibly pedantic point. The definitions in 4.2, commercial event is any event that intends to make a profit, but charity event is also events that make a profit, but for a charity. I think we should have the words somewhere for a commercial organisation in the commercial event definition, just because otherwise a charity event that intends to make a profit is technically speaking also a commercial event on the way it's currently worded. and like being overly pedantic.
The matter of law, charities don't make profits, actually. I think,
Yes, the event would. Is my point.
which do you-
Classics on common creates profit, doesn't it?
I think perhaps Councillor Cowan has a point.
Yeah, I'm not too sure because I think so as an example, Classics does generate fundraising in order to distribute that to a cause, which is clearly a charity event. If a charity were to run an Oktoberfest, then that would be a commercial event because the point of running the event is that they're wishing to make profit from a commercial point of view. So in this sense here, depending on the example, just because it's a charity running the commercial event doesn't mean that we would treat it as a charity event. Because it's about what the intention is for the funding that's made. Is it profit making or is it fundraising for a particular cause?
Thank you, Clark. On the basis that we're not Parliament enacting laws with the precision they deserve, I don't think we need 10-page definitions, and I think probably we can work with, allow the officers to work with what's there, which is what they've written.
That's fine. I just wanted to make sure we weren't going to end up with a bunch of charity events accidentally being classed as something they weren't. I'm content with the definition based on what's there.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so we are to approve the changes we've got before. Plus there was one further change which Clark mentioned, which was his name. There might be one too small cholesterol.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, all those in favour? Thank you. Unanimous as well. Dealing about 20 minutes and CPF 28 minutes last week, but I doubt anyone near the brevity, unfortunately, given the length of the agenda. Review of the bylaws, page 30. We are getting a bit legalistic. Perhaps not. Introduce this topic, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A year ago, this committee approved a set of draft bylaws for Harpenden green spaces. Public consultation took place about late in 2022. Feedback from the public and the officer comments on that feedback can be seen at Appendix A. As a consequence of the public feedback, some amendments have been made to the bylaws, as is illustrated within paragraph 3.5 of the report. The updated draft bylaws, following that public feedback, are at Appendix C. We will be able to apply to the Secretary of State for approval of our draft bylaws once all of our green spaces are recorded in the Harpenden Town Council's name. At the minute, the 4 play areas that were acquired on the 1st of April last year, we're still waiting for Land Registry to put those in our name. Following that, we will be able to make the application to the Secretary of State for approval. Committee on this occasion is being asked to note the public feedback received and the officers' comments, to approve the regulatory assessment at Appendix B, and to agree that officers can make an application to the Secretary of State seeking approval of the draft bylaws at Appendix C once all of Harpenden Town Council's grounds are recorded with Land Registry in its name. In addition, the chair has provided me with some information about typos and grammar type problems within the paperwork, and I will make sure that that is amended.
Okay, as I said, this is quite legalistic, and I didn't warn you that you were going to ask this, but although what you've said is absolutely clear, Phil, People do sometimes struggle with this process, and I myself have. It would be useful if one of the two officers would just explain exactly what the process is going forward. But sort of repeating the same words, but elaborating slightly, particularly in the sense of what freedom we might have were we to say we wanted something different. I understand we probably don't have a great deal of freedom. It's worth understanding that. And secondly, perhaps to give a bit of information about the deletions we've made from the draft, because obviously on good reason, but it's just to know the consultation process worked and we've made changes. It's useful to know a bit about why we've made each one on this given.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up.
Sorry, let me just warn the announcement wrong.
So in terms of the next steps and the general process with bylaws, I mean, it's fair to say it's quite a complex process that's set by government, and it's been complex for a long time now. But it's also very rigid in that there is complete inflexibility to do things locally very easily that changes any of the model bylaws. So the stage we're at now, having gone through the initial consultation, once we get a set of draft bylaws approved this evening, we're able to do that. We make an application to the Secretary of State and they will basically say whether we can move on to the next stage or not. A few years ago, the government changed the process, which in theory was to bring and allow more power to the local level and take away some of the decision making from the government, central government. However, in reality, what they still do keep in there is a large caveat that you have to basically at a key point get them to approve that they're happy with what you put forward. So almost devolution of it, but not quite. So we have to go to the Secretary of State with our draft bylaws, and we have to have shown how we've carried out an initial community engagement, how we've carried out a regulatory assessment, which picks up on the key questions that are set out in the appendix to this document. At that point, this is where we got to last time a number of years ago, and the Secretary of State essentially came back to us and for a number of different reasons could not approve that we were to move to the next level. Partly that was to do with some model bylaws around drones that were included, but it's also to do with some, what I would say are still sensible modifications that are relevant to the local area that they weren't accepting. And basically on that point, you can make modifications to local bylaws, but essentially there are very few anywhere that ever get approval. So we are in the position where quite often it's the model bylaw wording or not having the bylaw whatsoever. So that's the inflexibility point. So once Secretary of State were to approve our bylaws, the next stage is that we then have to conduct a final consultation on the final set to get some additional comments, should there be any, from members of the public. Off the back of that consultation, we will present the findings back to committee here. If committee are satisfied that there should be no further changes, the committee would then make a recommendation to council that these bylaws are made. At the point at which they are made, there's an additional set of clauses, which are revocation clauses for the existing bylaws. So they sit at the bottom of the new one that says the town council, having made these bylaws, mean that the following ones are no longer in force, essentially, and we would list our own existing ones, but also more crucially, all those that are currently in place as a result of the district council as this landowner. So that's the process of how we smoothly and sensibly get around to the end of this in what is a really tricky process. Who knows what the Secretary of State will come back with? So that's the process side of things. In terms of changes, so the options that you've got really are, there are model bylaws that are here at the moment that you might not like and you could withdraw them from the draft. There are additional model bylaws that could be included, or there are model bylaws that you may wish to make a modification to. However, noting my earlier point that modifications are very rarely accepted. So they are your three options in terms of changes this evening. In terms of the changes that we have made as officers as a result of reflecting on the community engagement, they are set out in 3.5. And there's detailed comments within the appendices where we set out our officer comments on each of the feedback. So essentially, there's one relating to cricket ball. Now, we believe that the ball games bylaw sufficiently covers any issues around cricket. The idea with this was really originally that there are certain times of the year where certain parts of the common, for example, you wouldn't wish to have a cricket ball being knocked about. Particularly, I don't know, one day it would be fine to play cricket on the common, on the triangle opposite, potentially. But on another day, if it's carnival, it wouldn't be acceptable. So that was the original aim of having the cricket in there. But we think that the ball games bylaw sufficiently covers that. There's a bylaw that was in there around the flying of kites, which we've received some comments on, and being frank, can't quite understand why we had it in the first place as officers. So that's kind of an apology. It feels a bit over the top. We have looked into the reason where that come from, and that was in the consultation in 2018, was it? I think around about then, maybe a bit earlier. There was some public comments around the kites can be distracting to traffic when they're closely adjacent to the highway. So that's how it got in last time. But again, you know, on reflection down the line, we don't think that that's proportionate. We've also, the other key change really, two key changes, one around persons over the age of 15 in play areas. Now, this was originally put in place to deal with some antisocial behaviour issues that we were suffering from and still suffer from. But actually, off the back of the community engagement comments, there are a number of comments where, for example, members of the public have said that in theory, this restricts me taking my son to a play area and my friend coming along for a chat, because that friend wouldn't be in charge of the child, which is what the bylaw said. So there were some examples like that. When we look at it on face value, we can't really give a sensible enough answer for that and justify the reason. So therefore, we've removed that out. In order to deal with the antisocial behaviour issue, we do think there are other bylaws and other measures that we have in place that can deal with that. So again, we feel it's proportionate not to include that in. And then the one perhaps that I would say has caused perhaps the greatest volume of comments was in relation to the golf course. Now, the model bylaw that we have in place at the moment is an old model bylaw. We were due to and put in place this rearranged bylaw or updated bylaw as a result of some issues that the golf club were having a number of years ago around people turning up with their clubs on the golf course and just playing without essentially a green thing or a ticket. There was also some issues around some private coaches using the land to coach golf. So at the time, it was a sensible thing to put forward, and not at any time was the intention to restrict any use of the golf course elements of the common. But clearly, the feedback that we received, there is a perception that people think we were trying to do that, and sometimes perceptions are just as dangerous as realities, and therefore we feel it's best not to have that bylaw updated, because again, we feel like we could deal with any challenges that was in place for in other ways. So that's the reason why we've put that. I think broadly that covers most of the change.
Thank you very much. Okay. Any questions of anyone?
Thank you. One odd one on page 58 of the spot analysis. It defines model aircraft as an unmanned aircraft which weighs not more than 7 kilograms without its fuel. It's probably a bit academic, but supposing I had one that did weigh more than 7 kilograms, you know, what's to stop me from flying it around on the common? And I think you're trying to deal with like the drones stuff.
Yeah.
In an earlier iteration.
Yeah, Chair. So, I mean, some of the changes around model aircraft are as a result of some legal cases elsewhere in relation to bylaws. And so my understanding is that the changes to the model bylaws in this particular case relates to some of the findings of them. So clearly that does mean that and because there is other legislation out there that deals with aircraft that are above the size and weight that is set out here. So this is one of the model bylaws. I understand it's to do with some legal challenge previously. And in fact, there is some other consistencies around in the model bylaws around model aircraft and model boats, I think it is, where actually one of them is really specific and the other one is less specific. But again, they're model bylaws, so we either have them as they are or don't have them, basically.
On page 42, just part of your comments, you make some references to examples using casting a net rather than a small net on a stick, and gas liquid fuel stoves being classified as fire, and then that use of a ball thrower would not be against the bylaws. I just wondered if those would be, with those kinds of examples would be included in the simplified document that you proposed, just to clarify for people. I think it's quite useful.
Yes, Chair, absolutely. And I think that's a key point that I probably should have mentioned at the start. Because the model bylaws are incredibly inflexible, we have had this suggestion that we will put in place in a committee, put a guidance document. So more of a plain English approach. This is what we mean by the bylaws. This is what we will enforce and what we won't enforce. So as an example, the ball thrower, Chair, if someone's throwing a dog's ball using a ball thrower, we don't have an issue with that. If somebody's got rocks in it and are throwing it across the common, we may have an issue with that. So, the model bylaws don't allow us to be that specific in their wording, but the guidance document will allow us to. So that will be the thing that is very much promoted and out there. So at least people can try and understand the reasons why.
Yes,
Okay, just on ball games, I've raised this before, but so ball games so it's page 56, 16. So it's more just confirmation on implementation. That although we've got this in place, and we could use this if there's a big game of lots of people playing football or any sort of ball game. If it's just because I'm just a bit concerned when it says to cause danger or give reasonable grounds for annoyance. I mean, there will be, if people are saying in Batford Springs, a couple sitting there having a picnic and a group of 6 lads turn up to play it, kick a ball around casually, that might be annoying, but whether it's reasonably annoying is probably less of a. So just about. And then also just about damage to tree and shrub. Like there's always a risk of football could hit a tree or a shrub. But then again, it's not really, wouldn't be reasonable to say stop playing football there. That makes sense.
Professor Hill raises an interesting point there, of course, which is one of interpretation.
Yeah.
And these bylaws, when ultimately finally adopted, will be law. Unless the council appoints enforcement officers, which we may consider doing at a future date, the only person who can really enforce this is policemen, and ultimately the offender appears before magistrates court, which would it's the court which decide the meaning of these words, all of which sounds rather heavy, but that's the consequence of these being law. The court would be the ultimate arbiter of the words. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you're quite right, Chair. I would also just add, though, that sometimes the bylaws are really useful, what I would describe as informal enforcement. So our ability to challenge people as officers, utilising the bylaws, and often that is enough for them to not continue what they're doing. So you're quite right. Yes, there is the law and the court element, and Town Council should in the future consider its enforcement powers, because it can adopt certain powers. But as I say, quite often these are used enough for informal enforcement, I would describe. And just particularly on that point, Chair, about the reasonable grounds, the Captain Hill point. So again, as an example, a couple of parents and a 5-year-old kicking a football around on the small bit of grass this side of the 1081, no issue with that really. A group of adults setting up a 5-a-side on that particular bit of green space would trigger some of these issues. So those are the sorts of our examples that we will try to set out in the guidance to bring it to life a little bit. So that where there are these kind of grey areas or interpretation, we will give examples of what we believe is what we would and wouldn't challenge. And that guidance would come through to committee down the line for you to have a look at to see whether you agree with. So hopefully, I think one of the key things here, Jerry, is the guidance is going to be absolutely crucial to the implementation of these things and to local people's understanding of them.
Thank you, Fabius. I think that's absolutely right, because the best one in the world, no one can memorise all these bylaws. It's quite an old-fashioned way of legislating. So a more discursive document to set out what's reasonable interpretation. Any other comments or questions on the bylaws or projects? I take it then we're content with this drafting. Okay, so on page 30, the feedback received from the consultation officer, let me say, approve the written assessments and B that was submitted to Secretary of State, and agree that we made an application to Secretary of State seeking approval of draft bylaws. C, one store grounds for by bylaws recorded in agency's name with the registrants. All those in favour? Thank you once again. Thank you very much. Thank you, officers, for your hard work on this rather labour-intensive process. Okay, so we then go to the tree policy, page 77, which is a report.
Yes, Chair, thank you. So as the committee will be aware, we periodically review our policies, but also in this particular case, we became aware of a Court of Appeal ruling that related to a tree falling. So we've carried out this review of the tree policy. It has been updated to take into account this particular court case. It also became clear during many discussions during the review that most of our trees are located in places easily accessible by many members of the public by the very nature of the fact that we're a town council, which means that all of our assets are close to populated areas. So as a consequence, the zones in the policy have also been updated to more accurately reflect the risk associated with being near to populated areas. The amended tree policy requires more frequent inspections to comply with the court case. And this, of course, means increased cost to the council, which we believe we can cover within the general budgets available. And what committee is ultimately being asked to do is to consider the amendments that have been made to the tree policy, which are shown as track changes. And if minded to do so, to approve the new policy, please.
Thank you, Carl. And actually, some of the track changes and everything else is didn't need to be changed.
Yeah, the rest of it is as it was.
Yeah, thank you. And I see we know that we're responsible for 31,000 trees across 31 sites, including the very large common and the large but not quite so large Romsey Park, which is quite a responsibility. In some respects, it's our most serious responsibility.
Yeah, I'll be chair. Yeah, absolutely.
Any questions? Anyone? Sure.
Literally only on page 81, just the numbering on the left side, 1.2, 1.3, 1.3 is duplicated basically.
Yes, thank you.
Good, that's fine. I missed that one.
We probably had picked it up.
Any other questions in all?
The removal of zone 3 means that in effect, there's now no low risk level and that all trees will be inspected.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, Chair, that would be correct. We gave it an awful lot of consideration, considered all of the areas where there are trees within detail. And we decided that because everywhere is near to populated areas, and even if you tried to make a judgment that it would be quite difficult to actually penetrate that piece of woodland, most of the woodland areas are not so deep to prevent a tall tree somewhere within there from falling and actually reaching outside of that zone. So what Councillor Hill says is correct.
I'm simply putting it another way. Most of them are like, is it an option of open access? Because it's a common, or it's a park, recreation area, etc. Therefore, the public. So we don't actually have any truly private land, do we?
Yeah, no, that's true, Chair. And if I just offer one additional comment, if I may, and that's the council here has got an incredibly proactive approach to tree management. And I think that probably links to our approach to risk management, which is pretty strong. And so when you're proactive about surveying your trees or any assets, in doing so, you're liable to find yourself more issues and therefore have higher costs. So it's absolutely the right thing to do. But I just would make the note that we are really proactive, and our research in neighbouring and other councils are that not many people have the level of robust approach to trees that we do. So I think we should be certainly reassured by that. I think.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, in another way, that probably quite a lot of district councils, far bigger than us, that don't necessarily have the same responsibility in terms of number of trees.
Yes, certainly not true. Yeah.
Sorry, just one question. The cost of the 20,000-ish per year for the increased frequency of surveys, is that just on the basis that we obviously also plant a lot of new trees and therefore the number of trees we have may well increase? Is that a realistic number at scale? If we plant, say, I don't know, 5,000 trees over the next 4 years, would that number go up, or would it be about 20,000 regardless?
So, Chair, I think the answer to that is that most of the trees that we have planted don't become a survey risk and a financial risk for surveys for a number of years to come, because they're not big enough to cause the risk. So what we're talking about at the minute is increased financial incurrences because of the fact that we have got to do the surveys more frequently.
Just a quick one. All that stuff we had a few years ago, that was Sutton Park, and all that stuff. If we became aware that there was something like that affecting trees, or potentially affecting trees, would that sort of accelerate the survey?
Yeah, Chair, absolutely. So yeah, that's there's normally three ways in which we identify issues with trees. One is through proactive surveying at different points in time. Two is where we have local expertise who have got tree inspection courses, and about their day-to-day business, particularly our green space officers, might spot something that we will then pick up and follow up on. And then the third is normally as a result of really poor weather. So recent winds, that causes us to go out and check our tree stock. So those are the ways in which we would identify issues with trees. So the Sooty Barton disease at the time was actually a result of previous surveys that we took. And you remember there was something like 300 trees that it was the option to take the kind of the full end of the spectrum, remove them all, and do nothing, or the middle option where we prioritise those high-risk zones. So yeah, the Sooty Barton that would be picked up through survey predominantly, but we do have these other mechanisms in place that mean that we kind of link to that proactive point, but we spot issues in other ways.
May I ask a question? Would we share this policy with our insurance companies, left insurer? Not so much comment, but just actually that we think they might be quite impressed by it, because we do have a robust policy.
Chair, so this would be one of the policies that we do have to share. I mean, I can't say for sure. I can double check whether it's something that they've asked us to provide previously, but as part of our annual, and it is an annual schedule review at the moment, we do have to provide a number of policies, and this would be one, because within our request, we would be setting out that we have
That's right.
the number of trees.
That's very impressive. Thank you. One question, Phil, on page 80. This was approved in 2022. We are updating it now because of the appeal decision which interested the tree for 2 years. Better. So when is the next review? Is it 2 years from 2022 or is it 2 years from now?
So what happens on that, Chair, is if the committee approve this policy tonight, then tomorrow I will update this as approved on the 15th of March 2023. The next review says it's every 2 years, so I can also add a date on there for March 2025 as well. And then I will save it in our current policies folder.
Yeah, Chair, just to add to that, so you were due to review this in March 2024.
Yeah.
So the reason it's in front of the committee this evening is because we've been aware of the legal case. So that's why we've essentially brought forward that review, because we're aware of things. So this is kind of the date as of now presented to you, and it'll be updated on the back of it.
I have a question, because essentially we're updating it simply because of the time period of inspection. Haven't or have we reviewed it, the rest of it? Because I feel we're looking at a small part of it. We're not looking, I haven't read it with a view to reading the whole bit. But in other words, it's not a full review that we've been doing, it's simply an update for one particular reason.
So Chair, no, this is a full review. So we've reviewed the full policy.
Okay,
So the awareness of the legal case has been the trigger for carrying out the review.
okay.
The whole policy has been reviewed.
The reason there aren't any changes is the rest of it's okay.
Yes,
in your
we're
opinion.
satisfied with the rest
Okay.
of the remaining as is.
Okay, that clear to everyone. Thank you. Thank you. I wasn't clear about that. Thank you. Fine. Yeah. Any other questions, anyone? Okay, so 721, committee's asked to approve the updated health plan policy. Council tree policy, can it say? I'll let you know. Thank you very much. So, we were to the next one. Oh, yes. Okay, so, yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. The current management plan for Hartlepool Common has come to the end of its 5-year term. And you will see in here that Appendix B summarises the key outcomes that have been achieved during the period of the outgoing plan. A new plan has been developed for the next 5 years. I think we're very fortunate that the Green Spaces Development Officer who's currently responsible for Hartlepool Common has huge amounts of ecology knowledge, as well as biodiversity and wildlife. He has put this plan together, and the new plan focuses on maintaining and enhancing the common. He's created and added new maps within the plan, which define habitats. That's on page 111 of the pack. He's also added a large section on ongoing maintenance objectives and the 5-year action plan, which can be seen at Appendix A of the new within the new plan. Committee are asked to consider the new 5-year plan that's presented here and to consider approving it for us.
Thank you. I'll just ask one question myself. Clearly, this is not the old plan that we're making a few changes over time. This is a completely new plan.
So things like the context of the common, the background information, the history of the stuff, that will be the same as what it was in the original one. But largely, anything that's not background and factual information about the common is new, Chair.
Okay. And it's a very impressive document. There's a lot of work gone into it. Like those to get anyone near criticising it, which would suggest I actually understood it all, because I do not have that expertise. But nevertheless asked to approve it. Any comments or questions from anyone?
I have one, Councillor Butterworth, that I've unfortunately only read this afternoon, so I haven't had a chance to ask any of my questions before now, so I've got quite a number, if we could just go through them. Don't know if you want me to go through them at the time.
I'm fine with that, because this is a very important document, and we've not been through it before. So I've been through it 5 years ago, but it's a strange document. So yes, please do.
So starting on page 95 of the agenda pack, or 6 of the management plan. So the maps, I think we're just not very clear. I think just see red, and it wasn't immediately obvious. The red lines which actually referred to the common, if that makes sense. Those maps. So I didn't know if we could perhaps, I don't know, use different maps without the red lines around the buildings, or have the common actually in a different colour. That was just the point on here.
Thank you. Yes, indeed.
Page 97, so next page, just under ownership, fifth line down, reference to the common. I don't know if that should be a capital C, that's just a minor point.
Okay, fine, great.
Legal items at the bottom. There's reference to the bylaws now undergoing a review process. And I didn't know if that could maybe, because obviously this document runs for 2028. So do you rather sort of say as of March 2023, but a review is undergoing, just to, it doesn't look like it's out of date. I don't know. That's just
I think everything speaks as of the present day when we're
Yeah.
looking at it. I think that's right. Yes.
On page 98, there's reference to Legion Fitness, and I just wasn't quite sure why there was such a specific reference to that particular company. And again, how long their license, the length of their license agreement ran, and whether we needed that specificity. The query really on that.
But,
And it seems to be the only place where there's any kind of specific reference to a.
I think it's distinguishable from the comes through.
Say again.
It's distinguishable from the Greek, like they're permanent. They've got their clubhouse and etc.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's just because they don't seem as permanent because there's no sort of.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Anyway, so that was just a very.
Yeah, I think we should just remove that. I think that's an oversight. We should just be saying that there are commercial boot camps and personal training services being run rather than
I
specifying.
think it is. Yeah. Sorry, do feel free to.
Yeah, I think it's probably better.
That's fine. It's very.
In the budgets on the same page 98, it's just query as to why they don't continue right through the period to 2028. I don't know if maybe if you just can't forecast that far in advance. It just kind of would seem relevant. That's when the document runs up.
Yeah, so the reason for that is basically as a council, we only produce a medium-term forecast for that period of time.
Yeah.
Basically, so we try to utilise the figures that are in the council's approved medium-term forecast, because otherwise it'd be a bit kind of finger in the airish, I think. So we try to link the two together.
Well, the later years, they've got fingers in it.
Yeah,
You're probably going to further.
yeah, but they're linked to the budget.
Yes.
So that's the thing.
Sorry, before we press on, because I didn't ask for reaction to the earlier comments, what do you want to do with any of the earlier comments?
Yeah, I just think in terms of maps, I think it's a fair point, and Barton Chair, we're kind of we have to struggle with some of the ordnance survey maps that we've got. So what we'll do is we'll take that away as subject to approving all this. We will take that away as an action to see if we can make the maps visually clearer. I'm sure there's a way we can do it. We may have to split it into sections on the common, it's rather large, and so getting one map that does it all. But we've got some really skilled green space officers who produce really good focus maps. I'm sure we can do so.
Okay. Right, Councillor.
On page 101 of the agenda pack, there's reference to dog walkers, and I just thought it seemed like that page 101 and 104 under the dog fouling section seemed to be some repetition there, and I wondered if the two couldn't just be combined rather than making separate references. Just to sort of things up a little bit. Slightly different.
Yes, you said a point that two seem to go together. That's just a reordering.
Yeah, we'll pick that change up. Probably pull the two together, but add them under the healthy, safe and secure section.
It's page 114 again, those photographs at the top. I just noticed that the dates underneath, I mean, the photos aren't particularly clear. Again, I don't know if that's just printing onto paper or whatever, but I did notice that the dates on the photographs, I mean, there was 2019. I'm assuming we could, we've done a lot of tree planting since then. If we couldn't maybe have more updated photographs for a newer document. Just, yeah. Maybe it's a tree at the end of the day, but I just think when the date is there, it just feels like it's an updated one.
Then to match chair, we'll revisit those after. You happy for us too?
Yeah.
Page 106, there's reference to Luton Trade Services and floral displays. Again, I think you might make the same point that it's current. So, but I think isn't that due to expire 2024? So I don't know if that's something that I'll leave in there or exclude.
And it's a matter of style, to the document, extent to which you're specific about the current time. You have to be consistent, or whether you just have generalities in the previous reference to some fitness things, but the generalities. I don't feel strongly which way we go.
Yeah, Chair, I mean, on that particular one, I would just say that that arrangement is soon to not be in place, so we are going to have to make a tweak at some point, I would say, when that happens. So we may as well now, if you're okay with that, say the town council also oversees a floral display across the town. So take out the reference to employing the specific company and any contractor, because the aim of that is actually bring it in-house.
I mean, I'd raised that point actually in a number of places. I haven't made reference to it because I wasn't sure about the sensitivities of what was agreed on Monday night. But obviously there was quite a lot of reference to that. So I don't know if that's going to be picked up in.
Chair, I think that's a really good point. Now, at the point of this being written, the council decision hasn't been taken. I'm thinking about it, that is kind of factual.
Flag those if you want to go back through them. But
So I think we should say the town council also oversees the delivery of the floral display. Take out the Luton Trade Services reference.
Yeah.
that will probably also affect the budget table as well.
I think, Chair, the budget table is a little bit trickier because the budget table will reflect what the council has agreed in the budget setting process. So that is factual as of what's been approved. So this time, sorry, not this time, next year. So next January, when the new budget is approved, effectively that table becomes out of date. So ordinarily, we would update the documents at that point.
Fine.
It wouldn't be a full review, but we would update things that's clearly out of date. And Chair, just linked to that actually, because this particular management plan is linked to a green flag application. So when we make our green flag applications, the content has to be up to date. So whilst you're carrying out a full review now, we do make sure that we sense check it as we go along as part of that application.
Okay. While we're doing this page by page, may I intervene with one? I've noticed on page 106. Under 100% golf club. At the end of that paragraph, welcome to produce golf course built by the approved in early 2022. Outlining management alteration of the designs. Query, have they done anything yet? And if they have, shouldn't we say that they have?
Chair, I believe I'm correct in saying, because the manager of the golf course changed last year, I don't think many of the actions have yet been carried out.
That's good.
Page 109, first paragraph, second point, it just says the application is then approved or refused. I just wondered if it's worth clarifying that. I believe that came to this committee, did it? So do we need to specify that as a, because it's not clear who it's approved or refused by. I mean, it's a technical point, really.
In accordance with the council's appropriate procedures, I think. I mean, it doesn't leave it vague because it may not always come to the committee. Yes.
What I wasn't sure about though, if it does always come to committee. Anyway, maybe it doesn't matter, but it was just something I picked up on.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too concerned about that one because I think it's just implied that it was approved, so that's by the council. If it's the CSC acting on behalf of the council,
Yeah.
that's fine. Or other times it may not be the case in the future. Some reference to other things.
Okay, page 110, under identification of important features, that last sentence just says a full habitat map can be found below, but obviously it's not below, it's overview for
Yeah.
page reference rather than below. That's why you can ignore the point.
When it says,
I looked down and I was like, there's nothing there. But it's in the page.
what would it say? It can be found after the table, after the table.
Page 112. On the key, I just found the trying to differentiate between the colours of green. I don't know how you go about that, where you put hashes through them or something. I couldn't tell what was what on those lighter shades of green. I mean,
I've got no show.
As it happens, on those different colours, you can actually work out where the common is here, or more clearly than on the previous map.
Yeah.
So this might be the answer.
Yeah.
Sort of clear.
Yeah, I don't think that one should come up earlier. We may be able to make it even clearer actually, so that the habitat map is something separate.
If we finish this in-house, it's a high standard.
Alex has been producing them, Chair.
Yeah, so again, Chair, we'll sort out the colour bits and make them.
similar thing on the map on 114. Just not here, and again, I don't know if that's just print quality or maybe that it can just be sharpened up a little bit.
Yeah, that is different.
Yeah.
That, Chair, is just an insertion issue. We haven't put that in as a high enough standard that we could have done basically.
Okay. Page 115. There's an abbreviation of approximately 12 hectares. I just didn't know why we abbreviated approximately. So, yeah, minor point second to the last line, last paragraph. Southdown Ponds, there's quite a lot of repetition. I think I saw it 2 or 3 times about this, the Southdown Ponds being drained and relined and then the oil interceptor installed. I just, again, I mean, probably most people wouldn't notice it, but I think it's repeated about 3 times through the document. And then there's also in that same paragraph, it just sort of large numbers of semi-domestic ducks on a pond can create significant habitat and water quality issues, but it doesn't actually point out that there are ducks living on that pond. If that makes sense, it's just kind of a comment, but it doesn't actually say we have them. You know what I mean?
Yes, it should say there are a large number of ducks on the pond.
Yes.
They can see ducks, which can create.
Yeah.
What is a semi-domestic duck?
One that you can just about touch.
Okay, one that doesn't run away.
One that doesn't live in a detached house.
Again, page 118. There's reference to the common walk. I don't know again if that should be a capital C, so just in the last paragraph. And then one other thing which just came to mind, there wasn't any reference of use of any of the forests by forest schools, and I don't know if they still use them, if that is something that you did want to include.
We took that out because they're not operating at present. There's no license.
That was all from me.
Right, on page 118, top paragraph events refers to a classic car rally, it's the appendix F. What's actually classics when common is referred to around on the page, is that correct, Foster? Sorry, appendix F rather than as well.
Yeah, but I'm wondering whether that's a.
That's wrong, because page 46 is appendix F, which is tree management, top car management. It's on the film.
Okay,
That's wrong. Okay, so the reference should be to for that page. Oh, yeah, right. It's on the top, isn't it? And real proofreader point, which is the way that it's formatted isn't consistent. In some pages, you've got a straight line on the right. Or style, and in other pages, you've got a ragged line on the right. And that's true throughout the document, and it's inconsistent. It's easy to fix in one. It's a bit odd and confusing one by the other, very much like whatever I'm slowly. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. A sort of slightly minor but more policy point than grammatical point. So firstly, very interesting to know that there is someone who still has the right to graze livestock on common. I thought that was on a track downhill. I've added some forest and sheep.
That's cross
But
form.
isn't it lovely stuff? But just on related, on page 24 of the document, 113 of the other document, you know what I mean. It says historically grazing would maintain the ecological balance in the common. Any opportunity to restore grazing to areas of the common would be beneficial, but it's not impossible due to the road network. It could not be ruled out as an option for future management. There isn't anywhere in the forward plan a reference to that again. Is this just it's in there as we would like to do this potentially if it became an option at some point, or is it in there as we should have a plan for how we might be able to make this happen, in which case it should probably be in the forward plan somewhere. It seemed like a sensible thing for us to be having a look at if there was a feasible way we could do it. And I just thought I'd ask the question.
Yeah, fair. So the answer to that is that it's in there because it would be a really great thing to do from a biodiversity point of view. And I think it's a great thing to have on the common personally. But there isn't really a feasible way of making it happen. So that's why it's not kind of in the action plan, if you like.
It's an aspiring point.
Yeah, it's some, we would love somebody, it would be great if someone came forward that could bring that to life, but we haven't really got the ability to do that ourselves, and it's not necessarily realistic. So that's why it doesn't form an action.
Right. Some common land near the centre of Cambridge where they graze cattle, but then it is fenced off. It's not fenced off, so.
That's it, yes. So slightly different common land. So that's a farmers association, that particular bit of land that I think you're thinking of, because my father-in-law, his flat is literally around the corner from it. You go in and it's brilliant. And I've got a bit of common land near where I live, which is public, which have similar. It's easier for them to section things off. It would be great to have.
Out of interest, would a farmer be allowed to put no electric take-up to keep the animals within the common area?
So part of the issue would be that they wouldn't be allowed to do that because it doesn't fit with the common use of the common, if you like, and it restricts other users. So that's part of the issue. Being able to fence them in would actually cause other issues around people's general ability to use the common. So it would be at the farmer's risk to just have their sheep roaming around without any fence.
But commoners have rights in addition to grazing, don't they? Typically, there's the right to, harvest fish.
Yeah.
Because somewhere beginning with P, I can't remember what it's called now, and also pick up wood, fallen wood.
Yeah.
That was an right
Mhm.
in the Middle Ages. To those rights.
Well, you tested me now.
We've written that in the
stories.
Bible. We've written them out in the Bible.
So all I do know is that those common rights don't exist anymore on our common. But actually, it's quite an interesting point. Personally, I might have a look into that, see what I can find. But yeah, that's certainly the only rights that apply to us here.
And the bit, just between the 1081 and West Common, yeah, which is common land, I understand, but which is owned by the frontages. You know, they have a strip of that. What applies there?
So it is still common land if it is added onto the open, if it's classed as access land, open access land, then people have rights to go over it. I don't believe that is actually on the open access land maps. Therefore, if there's a right of way for it, and there is one, isn't there, on the corner, then that's the right. Otherwise, people, general public, don't have any rights over it. It's quite a misconception about common land, actually, because people generally think that any common land you've got rights to go over, but actually it doesn't quite work like that. It's whether it's registered as open access land that gives people the rights, and that only gives people the rights to walk and to do not only certain things. It gives people the rights to walk their dog, but only on a lead, for example, which is a misconception. So yeah,
Some people dump grass cuttings in there,
yeah,
which I assume is theoretically prohibited.
I would have thought so. Yeah.
Yes, Chair. Can I just give my apologies? Got to take an urgent call. Of course. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'll see you all soon. Thank you. Right, okay, yes.
The other separate point, just, you mentioned, the clubs, I think particularly, so on sort of, we refer to, on page 17 on their thing, on 106, 18 and 27. You mentioned not the clubs, but it's in the sort of clean and well maintained section. So, but I wonder if there's something that we can put in somewhere about how I know the cricket club and the golf club in particular do a lot to promote youth sport. And I wonder if there's just some sentence we can put somewhere in the document about how the commitment from the town council to promote and support youth sport, youth activity somewhere. I mean, it might go in community involvement, it might go in welcoming place. I just think I'd like somewhere about positively promoting and supporting youth sports with the clubs, etc.
I do like to totally with that. In one sense, it's not about the land, but in the other, it's how we exploit the land.
Yeah,
for the
how we-
residents. So,
Yeah, or maybe, I don't know, community involvement, marketing, promotion, something about celebrating youth sport clubs on the common do.
If that's sensible, Chair, we'll find a suitable place for it.
Thank you.
If everyone else, just to say, that if somebody else go through all this again, because there are a few typos, there are missing apostrophes, and lack of consistency in a few things, so it does need a bit of a clean up.
I mean, it is an important document. It's essentially a new document. I'm conscious we didn't have a lot of time to get to grips with it, and inevitably there are some points more superficial, and I've made some as well, which are more to do with the grammar of the noun or whatever, which can detract from the substantive points, which we haven't had long to consider, which I think is unfortunate because a lot of work has gone into it, and the fact that we can suggest things that could be slightly better doesn't detract from the expertise which has gone into the serious substance here. But I'm sorry we haven't had very long to prepare. I've been talking about it maybe half an hour. This is the last meeting of the year. I just sort of like to reflect that this document is not alone in that it's something that comes to committee with not having very long to consider it, and whether there is another way, and I'm not suggesting something now, but just putting that idea out there, there's another way to consider these long documents, whether subcommittee or a more informal setting, which can just go through and make suggestions so that when it comes to the committee, it's a more slightly more polished document, and we've all understood it better. Anyone has any thoughts on that?
I think it would be useful, because as I said, I mean, I've read it this afternoon, so I probably haven't given it as much sort of time and consideration as it's due. But I've tried to pick up as much as I can, but I perhaps, as you say, I haven't input as much as I might have done if I'd given it more time.
Any other thoughts or people content with the process? Okay, fine, okay. That reminds my personal view that there might be another way to do it with long documents, but that's not something for further discussion or deciding tonight. So the recommendation here is to approve the 5-year Harmony Common Management Plan. 28. But actually, it is updated. Necessary for and competition entries and green flag entries and any other necessary changes. So, all those in favour? It's a very, very impressive document. So please thank the authors for all that work. Tree work centre. You've seen this one before. It's not seen before, isn't it? Just no.
So, Chair, this tender, as you just pointed out, came before the committee in January. When the committee resolved to approve this tender, subject to some clarification, the tender has been brought back, updated in order to provide this clarity for the committee. The committee is asked to reconsider it, including the shown amendments in there, which are intended to provide clarity. And if minded to do so, then to approve the proposed Tree Works tender specification as it is at Appendix A.
Okay, we've been through the terms before. Would you like to elaborate on what the changes are?
Yes, Chair, just apologies, second one, I just find.
Yeah, I'll have to pick that up, Chair. So just to elaborate on Phil's point, given the significance of managing our tree stock and the risks posed by that, the question and discussion you had last time, I felt it was really important that we brought clarity back to the committee, given the significance and importance and the risks associated. So the two key, the key change really is just clarifying some of the assessment process. And first of all, and it wasn't quite clear in the version you saw before, and we didn't quite give you clarity in our response to the meeting. The assessment process, as with all of our tenders, is kind of two-stage. So what we want to make clear is the changes under Section 13 is we have an initial screening that we carry out on the majority of tenders, if not all of them. And then in the case of this one, there are a series of questions that we have to ensure that the tenderer is answering yes to. And if they're not answering yes to them, then they don't proceed to the second stage. So essentially, there are red lines for us on this tender, and that relates to the health and safety information about their organisation, so the qualifications and risk assessments, whether they provided us with similar work that's delivered to a high standard and the references around that. confirmation that they've actually visited the sites, because it's no good us getting, with trees, getting something, a tender based on a desktop exercise, absolutely crucial. And also that they provide a real clear timeline for the delivery of works. That is really important, because in our tree policy, and particularly in tree policy now that's been updated, we're very clear around the timescales in which we will undertake surveys on our trees and undertake the works off the back of them. So we need to be very clear at the point of appointing contractors, that we're appointing them on the basis that they're signed up to delivering within the time frame that we need them to. That's very, very important, because in the scenario that we appoint somebody and we need work done by X date legally, and to cover our risk management strategy, if they then do not deliver on that point, the council can at least show that they have instructed that company with the intention of the work being carried out within the legal timings that we need to be carried out. So I just wanted to make that point absolutely clear. So we've clarified the screening process. The second part that we've also added in there that we have in all our tenders, but made it more prominent. The town council isn't bound by the outcome of any detailed assessment. So this is just an indication of where things are going. And yes, quite often we will end up with a contractor that performs the best in the assessment. But sometimes two contractors might be close, and there might be one particular element of somebody who might have scored slightly lower that would mean that they would be our preferred contractor. The other thing that the point that was discussed quite a bit last time was around the thresholds, the price versus time frame. Now, with the reason why we have a criteria on time frame, and the reason why we specify in the application how long the work will take, is because we don't want to create a tick box tender exercise where a tenderer can quite easily just tell us what we want to hear, basically. So we have the time frame set out in there and the percentage against it, and we deliberately don't say how that's going to be assessed against. We have the duration specified because that allows us to sense check what they're saying to us. So, for example, if our requirement is the work's going to be done in 6 months, well, no, let's have a shorter. Say it's going to be done. It needs to be done in 12 weeks, and we have a tender and it says yes, tick, we can deliver by that date. If on their other bit of their form they say it's going to take them 15 weeks, we can sense check that to say those two things don't add up. And I know that sounds quite obvious and a bit silly, but believe me, that does happen at times. And by having those different points within there that clearly sets out how we're assessing it, but doesn't give all of our top secrets away as to create a tick box. That's why we have the two different things. So the specific on the time frame. So if a contractor or tenderer says that they're going to deliver by the time in which we need them to, and their answer to the week's question of how long it's going to take stacks up, they will receive the 20%. Then there'll be a tapering off after that point, depending on how long. So if a company, so for example, if a company says they're going to do it 3 months after our deadline, they'll probably get zero because that is way beyond what we need it to be. If it was a couple of weeks, then there would be a tapering off that percentage, so they would score less on that to reflect their ability to deliver. On the price, the approach we use is the tenderer that submits the lowest price will receive the full 80 marks, if you like. So I see these percentages as marks. There's a maximum of 100 marks. And then all other tenderers against that receive a proportionate percentage off of the 80, if you like. So if there are if there's a tenderer that's out by £1 of the lowest one, they're almost going to get themselves 80% as well. So it's a formula we've always used with all of our tenderers. And I'm very happy to share that after the meeting without potentially putting it on the recording now, but that's how we go about it. So we have to stipulate how it will be assessed, but we also don't want to make it too easy that it becomes a tick box exercise and someone with the lowest price wins who might not ever deliver what we need to. Hopefully that explains the key changes, Chair.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. Very helpful indeed. I'm sorry we weren't able to approve it last time. I hope the delay doesn't affect your intentions of the deadline.
Well, Chair, actually a positive outcome is that we have now received all the permissions we require for all the works that were within the conservation area, so we can go ahead straight away.
Okay. Fine, no, that explanation is very helpful, thank you. Any questions, anyone? Okay, so to approve the tree representative spec at appendix A, all in favour? Okay, unanimous. Thank you.
The last page.
Okay, Phil, last time.
Thank you, Chair. So we've received a request for a memorial tree on the Batford Springs Local Nature Reserve near to Marquis Lane. The request has been made by residents of Marquis Lane in respect of Mrs. Petra Sprowson. I apologise if that's not the correct spelling, the correct pronunciation. Petra was a resident on Marquis Lane. She lived there with her for 18 years with her husband, and I believe her daughter is 14. She used to do litter picking on the nature reserve opposite her house. She was an allotment holder at Marquis Lane allotments. She was chair of the Seawood PTA and did lots of fundraising for them. During lockdown, Petra was a member of the Marquis Lane Unofficial Street Orchestra, where she took part in singing and playing the flute. And she also arranged for that street orchestra to appear on the ITV London News. Officers have considered the requests against the Harpenden Town Council memorial policy. The request for the memorial tree was accompanied by a request for a plaque too. Harpenden Town Council's policy says that memorial plaques for trees are not usually permitted unless in exceptional circumstances, and requests will be considered on a case-by-case basis. That's what our policy says. And so we bring this matter before committee today with a recommendation that the request to plant a memorial tree is permitted, but without a plaque.
Okay, thank you. I'll kick off if I may, because I'm sorry, I've not read the particular policy, but if it's not usually permitted to have more of an extra tree, unless there are exceptional circumstances, and it's decided on a case-by-case basis. Clearly, officers have received details of the, and treated it or summarised it, of the case for this particular memorial. Now, have officers considered whether exceptional circumstances have been made out? I'm wondering whether that's something we should reconsider. Do we have any precedents for this? As what when we decide one way or the other?
Yeah, I mean, Phil, I don't know if you want to start and then I can give my take on it, or I can go first if you want me to. It might be helpful. So, Chair, my take on it, and this is often one of those things that once you have a policy, but quite often once you apply it, you might start to see some issues with it. So, right now, looking at this, I can't necessarily give an example of what would be an exceptional circumstance, if you like, and that's incredibly subjective. If I was to draw parallels with some other things that we do, where we do put plaques, I just wonder whether that policy needs to be reviewed in that light. So, for example, benches. Do we put plaques on benches? Yeah, we do. Yeah. And our floral displays, when we do sponsorship, they have plaques.
Yeah.
So actually, I think just on reflection, this is potentially one of those where the policy might not feel right, and potentially, should the council have any issue with putting any plaque by the side of a tree. I would question that because there are some trees that we have put a plaque by, and that's generally been where it's been like an organisation, hasn't it? So I would struggle to see why an organisation that does an awful lot in town would have been able to have a plaque, whereas an individual who might do an awful lot may not need to. So on reflection, I think I couldn't tell you what an exceptional circumstance would be. So the recommendation in here, I would agree with, but actually I wonder whether the memorial policy is correct on that and needs changing.
I'm not quite sure where to go because it says traditional long-term resident, street which is nearby, and did some good works, a contribution to the community. Once you've achieved that, it's quite difficult to decide between a potential applicant and another one 2 months' time. Why do you distinguish between commercial and non-commercial? Both cases, whoever it is paying for this more than free, we're not. And here we're taking the money and saying that actually we don't fancy a plaque, but we'll take the money anyway. It just seems a bit odd.
Yeah, I would agree, Chair. I think, as I said, it's one of those that when you apply a policy, and if I compare it to some of the other examples, I couldn't. If I was being really human about it, I can't really see why we would reject it unless there's an obvious reason. I think just potentially as officers here, we probably should have flagged this in a different way. That in light of this, the policy needs tweaking. So, I mean, what I would suggest, and Phil, I think we'd have the same view, is actually we were recommending that we don't have any issue with the plaque, but that, not in your resolution, but this is the policy is brought back to a committee in a future date to revisit that particular point in there. Doesn't feel right. That's my advice.
Yes, because if someone's worth having a memorial, what said they are, why can't they have the words? I don't know who was first. You tell me who was first.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's
First time for everyone. Yeah, no, I think if it's a memorial tree, it's only a memorial tree really, if there's something that denotes it as a memorial tree, and therefore I can't see that you could, unless the resident doesn't want a plaque, I can't see that we can say that yes, you can have a tree, but no, you can't have anything that acknowledges the reason for the tree's existence. So I would be inclined to review the policy in the future. I feel that the policies are there to be broken sometimes.
so that does say accept one.
Sometimes.
Councillor Scriven?
A couple of things really. Obviously, tree planting may be more popular than actually asking for a plaque on a bench. So you kind of think, well, how many of these do we allow? Because I don't know, I don't particularly like the idea of having hundreds of trees across the town with plaques at the base of them. So thinking about that, is there a way of actually having the plaque in the tree somewhere? And I know you can, on an established tree, you can do that, but probably not in a tree that's going to be planted and mature. And then I feel like we might have recently, did we have 3 of these come through to our last meeting maybe? I feel like the milk bank, were they benches? Yeah. I felt like we had trees and we refused the. It was the milk bank, the Women Milk Foundation, and they weren't allowed plaques or something. I feel like there was something recent. I can't quite recall, and it's whether we need to revisit those.
Well, we would have to check that, Chair, but certainly there are examples of plaques that have, in my time, been put with trees that have been planted from organisations that donated them. So I think that's the key conflict here, really, I think. And I think perhaps in a similar way to we do the benches, where we identify areas where we would be happy for memorial benches to be, I think that should be potentially a similar thing with the trees, so that we don't get existing trees having requests for plaques, but there's only certain trees in the future that we might consider them.
But of course, if it's a new tree, the family's paying for the tree. If it's an existing tree, what are they doing?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
The last, just looking at the minutes, page 3. They're all memorial benches.
So, I think if I have the time quite correctly, we changed without a memorial plaque to with a memorial plaque.
I think so, Chair. That would be my suggested officer amendment, that's all.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with plaques or plaques necessarily. It's just, with the council, would officers give like a recommendation on like the design of the plaque, or so that if we get another application for a plaque next meeting or whatever, and it's all the same, it's all the plaques on the same design and size, and
Yeah.
the words can be for them, but
Yeah,
just it's like just saying, just so it's not all big deal.
yeah, even the words might be sensitive.
Yeah,
Well, that kind of thing.
Just not the derelict as a tweet on it.
absolutely, Chair. So we have a standard approach to them at the moment, so we would just continue that.
Yeah.
And we would sense check the wording.
Yes, it is.
It's all brought from the same suppliers potentially.
Yeah, so the same size, material, that kind of thing, so there's a consistency.
Yeah.
Across that.
Yeah, fine.
Fine. And you've got the point about reviewing the policy, but it's not formal resolution.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I think there's unanimity on amending this resolution, so it's with a memorial plaque rather than without. Yeah, and so we vote on the amended resolution. Over. And that was unanimous. And that's the end of the meeting. I thank the councillors. So I take this opportunity to thank Phil as the clerk for these meetings.